I remember the exact moment when everything changed. It wasn't when my wife passed away 15 years ago, leaving me to raise our daughter alone. It wasn't when I worked double shifts at the construction company to pay for Megan's college education. No, it was on a perfect June afternoon in Boston, under a white tent adorned with lilies and roses, when I overheard my future son-in-law tell his groomsmen, "That old man, he's just here to eat for free." I stood frozen, the champagne flute trembling slightly in my weathered hand. At 62, I had spent my entire life building something from nothing. My calloused hands and aching back were testaments to decades of honest labor. The $47,000 I had paid for this wedding, money pulled from my retirement savings, apparently meant nothing to Bradley Thompson, the investment banker who had somehow convinced my daughter I wasn't worth respecting. I should start from the beginning. My name is Robert Mitchell. I've worked construction in Massachusetts for 43 years, starting as a laborer and eventually becoming a site supervisor for Mitchell and Sons Construction. The Sons part was aspirational. I had only one child, my daughter Megan. Her mother, Catherine, died from breast cancer when Megan was just 13. Since then, it had been just the two of us against the world. We lived in a modest three-bedroom house in Quincy. Nothing fancy, but always warm and clean. I worked overtime whenever possible to make sure Megan had everything she needed. When she got accepted to Boston University, I sold my beloved 1969 Mustang to help cover the first year's tuition. I never told her about that sacrifice. There was no need. That's what fathers do. Megan graduated with honors in finance and landed a job at Commonwealth Investment Group. That's where she met Bradley, Yale-educated, country club member, summer house in the Hamptons. Bradley. From our first meeting at the Morton Steakhouse downtown, I sensed his disdain. The way he spoke about blue-collar America, as if it were some quaint, distant concept, rather than the world that had built and paid for his privilege. "Dad's old school," Megan would say, laughing nervously whenever I'd mention saving or question their extravagant spending. "He doesn't understand how finance works today." Perhaps I didn't, but I understood value. I understood sacrifice, and I understood respect. When they announced their engagement after 18 months of dating, I was hesitant but supportive. He makes her happy, I told myself. That should be enough. When they began planning the wedding, I offered what I could, $30,000, nearly half of my remaining savings. "Oh, Daddy," Megan had said, her voice taking on that tone she used when speaking to a child. "That won't even cover the venue. Weddings are expensive these days." They'd chosen the Fairmont Copley Plaza, one of Boston's most prestigious hotels. The initial estimate came to $85,000. I increased my contribution to $47,000, leaving myself with just enough to get by if I continued working another 5 years beyond my planned retirement. "You're a lifesaver, Dad," Megan had said, hugging me quickly before returning to her phone to text Bradley the good news. In the months leading up to the wedding, I was systematically excluded from most decisions. "Bradley's mother has amazing taste," Megan would say, or "Bradley's father knows the best caterer in New England." My role was reduced to writing checks and staying out of the way. The day before the wedding, I attended the rehearsal dinner at an upscale restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor. I sat at a table with distant relatives, while the Thompson family occupied the center tables. Bradley's father, Richard, a hedge fund manager, gave a toast that received uproarious laughter. "And to Robert," he added almost as an afterthought, "thanks for showing up." More laughter. I smiled tightly and raised my glass. That night in my hotel room, I called my oldest friend, Mike Sullivan. We'd worked construction together since we were teenagers, and he was the closest thing to a brother I'd ever had. "They make me feel like I'm some kind of embarrassment," I confessed, staring out at the Boston skyline. "Like my whole life amounts to nothing because I work with my hands." "Screw 'em, Bobby," Mike said bluntly. "You built a life for that girl. You gave her everything. If she can't see that, it's her loss." But it didn't feel like her loss. It felt like mine. The wedding day arrived bright and clear. June 18th, 2023. I put on the tuxedo I had rented. Bradley's mother had insisted the fathers wear a specific style that cost $300 to rent for the weekend. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. My hair had gone completely gray, lines creasing my tanned face from years working outdoors. I straightened my bow tie and practiced my smile. At the hotel, I was directed to a small anteroom where Megan was getting ready with her bridesmaids. When I entered, the conversation stopped abruptly. "Dad, you're early," Megan said, checking her diamond-studded watch. "We're still doing hair and makeup." "I just wanted to see you before everything gets crazy," I said, holding out a small blue box. "This was your mother's. She would have wanted you to have it today." Inside was Catherine's sapphire pendant, the one I had given her on our 10th anniversary. Megan glanced at it briefly. "Oh, Dad, it's a bit old-fashioned. And it doesn't really go with my theme." She closed the box and handed it back. "But thank you for thinking of me." I slipped the box back into my pocket, feeling Catherine's absence more acutely than I had in years. "Mr. Mitchell, would you mind waiting outside?" the wedding planner asked, not unkindly. "The photographer wants to capture the bridesmaids helping with the dress, and we're running behind schedule." I nodded and stepped out, the blue box heavy in my pocket. The ceremony was set for 4 p.m. in the hotel's garden, followed by cocktails, and then the reception in the grand ballroom. At 3:30, I was directed to a holding area with the other members of the wedding party. Bradley and his groomsmen were already there, drinking scotch and laughing loudly. I stood awkwardly by the window, checking my phone to have something to do with my hands. That's when I overheard it. "Man, does your father-in-law always look that miserable?" one of the groomsmen asked Bradley. Bradley glanced over at me and smirked. "That's just his face. Blue-collar guy, you know. Probably wishing he was watching a ball game instead. Did he at least help with the wedding? These things cost a fortune." Bradley took a sip of his scotch. He threw in some cash. "Not nearly enough, considering what Megan put up with growing up. You should have seen the neighborhood they lived in." The groomsman nodded toward me again. "So what's he doing here?" "Father-daughter dance obligation." That's when Bradley said it loud enough for me to hear. "That old man, he's just here to eat for free." The words hit me like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I set down my champagne flute carefully, afraid I might drop it. Bradley's eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of something. Not embarrassment, not remorse, but annoyance at being caught. He turned away, raising his voice to change the subject. I walked out of the room, needing air. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, trying to process what I just heard. A server passing by asked if I was feeling ill. "Just needed a moment," I said, straightening up. "Which way to the garden?" I took my place for the ceremony, standing at the entrance where I would meet Megan to walk her down the aisle. When she arrived, radiant in her $12,000 gown, I almost forgot my pain. Almost. "You look beautiful," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Just like your mother." Megan smiled, but her eyes were already focused down the aisle where Bradley waited. "Remember Dad's small, even steps. The photographer needs to get the right shots." We proceeded down the aisle as rehearsed. When we reached the altar, the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" "I do," I said, the traditional words feeling hollow in my mouth. I placed Megan's hand in Bradley's, and he didn't even look at me as I stepped away. Throughout the ceremony, I kept hearing Bradley's words on repeat. "He's just here to eat for free." 43 years of labor, of sacrifice, of putting my daughter first, reduced to being an unwelcome guest at a meal I had largely paid for. The reception was even worse. I was seated at a table far from the wedding party, with some of Megan's former teachers and a couple of distant cousins. My table wasn't called until last for the buffet, and by then, many choices were depleted. Eating for free, indeed. When it came time for speeches, Bradley's father spoke at length about the bright future ahead for the couple, about Bradley's promising career and Megan's fortunate entry into their family. Bradley's mother gushed about the beautiful grandchildren they would have. When the microphone was finally passed to me, the wedding planner quickly stepped in. "We're actually running behind schedule," she announced. "We need to move on to the first dance." I sat back down, the words I had carefully prepared left unspoken. For the father-daughter dance, the DJ called me to the floor. Megan and I swayed to Butterfly Kisses, the song she had chosen. It had been playing on the radio the day I taught her to ride a bike without training wheels. "I'm so happy, Dad," she whispered. "That's all I've ever wanted," I replied, meaning it despite everything. As the song ended, Bradley cut in smoothly. "Mind if I steal her away?" he asked, not waiting for my answer. I returned to my table and watched as they glided across the floor, looking like something from a magazine cover. I felt invisible. Later, as guests began to leave, I approached Megan to say goodnight. She was surrounded by her new in-laws and college friends. "The photographer wants some more shots of the bride and groom with the Thompson family," the wedding planner informed me when I tried to get Megan's attention. "Could you tell her I'm leaving?" I asked. "Of course," she said, but I could tell my message would be lost in the commotion. I walked out of the Fairmont alone, the cool night air a relief after the stuffy ballroom. My Uber driver was silent as we made the journey back to Quincy, for which I was grateful. I needed time to think. That night, lying in my empty house, I made a decision. Something had to change. If I was nothing more than a free meal ticket to my daughter and her new husband, perhaps it was time to show them exactly what my absence would mean. The next morning, I called Mike. "I need your help with something," I told him. "Name it," he said without hesitation. "I need to find out exactly what Megan and Bradley are planning with their finances. I have a feeling I'm being set up as their retirement plan." Mike was silent for a moment. "That's a heavy accusation, Bobby." "I know, but I heard things at the wedding, things that make me think I'm being played for a fool." 2 days later, Megan called. She and Bradley were leaving for their 3-week honeymoon in Europe, a trip I had contributed $8,000 toward. "The wedding was perfect," she gushed. "Everyone said it was the most beautiful ceremony they'd ever seen." "I'm glad," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "When do you get back?" "July 12th. Oh, and Dad, Bradley and I were talking. We think it might be a good time for you to consider downsizing. That house is too big for just you, and the market is hot right now." There it was, the first move in their game. "I'll think about it," I said noncommittally. "Great. Bradley's friend is a real estate agent. He could come by and give you an estimate. The thing is, we've found this amazing starter home in Brookline. It would be perfect for us, but we're a little short on the down payment with all the wedding expenses." "How short?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would be significant. "Just about $95,000. We thought maybe you could sell your house, get something smaller for yourself, and help us out with the difference. It would be an investment, really." My house, the one I had paid off 5 years ago after decades of mortgage payments. The home where I had raised her, where every corner held memories of our family. They wanted me to sell it so they could have a starter home in one of Boston's most expensive neighborhoods. "Let me think about it," I repeated. "Don't think too long," she said. "The market moves fast." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time looking at old photographs. Catherine smiling on our wedding day, Megan's first day of school, the three of us at Fenway Park, cheering for the Red Sox. When had things changed so dramatically? When had I become nothing more than a financial resource to be drained? Over the next 3 weeks, while Megan and Bradley toured Europe, posting endless photos of luxury hotels and Michelin-starred restaurants on Instagram, I put my plan into motion. First, I consulted with an attorney, Maria Gonzalez, who specialized in estate planning. I laid out my concerns frankly. "I've worked my whole life to build something for my daughter," I explained. "But I'm worried she and her husband see me as nothing but a checkbook. I want to protect myself while still doing right by her in the long run." Maria listened carefully, taking notes. "What you're describing sounds like financial elder abuse, Mr. Mitchell, or at least the beginnings of it. It's more common than you might think. especially with adult children who develop a sense of entitlement to their parents' assets. We spent hours reviewing my finances, my property, and my options. By the end of our second meeting, I had a clear path forward. Next, I contacted a friend who worked at Commonwealth Investment Group, the same company where Megan and Bradley were employed. Ted Winters had been my client when I renovated his kitchen 5 years ago, and we had stayed in touch. I need to know if there's anything I should be concerned about regarding my daughter and her husband's financial plans. I told him over coffee at a small diner far from their office. Ted looked uncomfortable. You know I can't share client information, Bob. I'm not asking for details, just a warning if I need one. He stirred his coffee for a long moment. Let's just say if I were you, I'd be careful about any financial documents you sign, and maybe check your credit report. That was enough. I thanked him and left a generous tip. My third step was to hire a private investigator. It felt extreme, but I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. Carlos Mendez came highly recommended by Maria, my attorney. I just need to know their intentions, I told him. If I'm being paranoid, I'll gladly pay you to tell me that. Carlos didn't think I was paranoid. Within a week, he had compiled a disturbing report. Bradley had significant gambling debts at casinos in Connecticut and New Jersey. He and Megan had maxed out 3 credit cards. Most concerning, someone had run a credit check on me recently, the kind typically done before taking out a loan in someone else's name. They've also been inquiring about reverse mortgages, Carlos told me, sliding a folder across the table. Specifically, how one might set up such an arrangement for a parent. I felt sick, but also strangely vindicated. My instincts had been right. The final piece fell into place when Mike called me, his voice tight with anger. You're not going to believe this, Bobby. My nephew works at Boston Trust Bank. Bradley came in asking about adding his name to your accounts as a financial custodian. Said you were getting forgetful and needed help managing your money. Did he have any documentation? I asked, my heart pounding. He had some papers, but the bank officer thought something seemed off and said they'd need to speak with you directly. Bradley wasn't happy about it. I was shaking by the time we hung up. The betrayal was even deeper than I had imagined. They weren't just after my house or a loan. They were trying to take control of everything I had. When Megan and Bradley returned from Europe on July 12th, tanned and seemingly carefree, I was ready. I invited them to dinner at my house, saying I wanted to hear about their trip and discuss their housing situation. They arrived looking slightly impatient, as if this visit were an obligation to be endured. Bradley immediately began eyeing the house, making comments about which walls could be knocked down and how much the property values in the neighborhood had appreciated. So, have you thought about what we discussed? Megan asked as I served the lasagna I had made from Catherine's recipe. About selling the house. I have, I said calmly. In fact, I've made several decisions while you were away. I saw them exchange a quick glance. Bradley leaned forward, suddenly interested. I've decided it's time for me to get my affairs in order, I continued, cutting a piece of lasagna. At my age, it's important to have everything properly arranged. That's very responsible, Dad, Megan said, her voice taking on that condescending tone again. We could help you with that. Actually, I've already taken care of it. I took a sip of water. I've updated my will, consolidated my accounts, and placed most of my assets in an irrevocable trust. Bradley's fork clattered against his plate. A trust? What kind of trust? The kind that protects my assets and ensures they're used according to my wishes, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. I've named Mike Sullivan as the trustee. Mike, your construction buddy, Megan's voice rose. Dad, that's not appropriate. Family should manage family matters. Mike is family, I said simply. He's been there for me for 40 years. Bradley was turning red. This is ridiculous. You're not thinking clearly. We should be discussing these decisions together. Like we discussed the wedding plans together, I asked. Or like we discussed how I'm just here to eat for free. The room went silent. Megan's eyes widened as she looked between Bradley and me. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "I heard what Bradley said to his groomsmen at the wedding, about me being there just to eat for free. After I paid $47,000 for that wedding. After I've spent my entire life working to give you every opportunity." Bradley attempted to laugh it off. "It was just wedding day jitters, Robert. Guys joking around. You're taking it way out of context." "Am I also taking it out of context that you tried to add yourself to my bank accounts without my knowledge? Or that you've been inquiring about reverse mortgages on my home? Or that someone ran an unauthorized credit check on me?" Now Megan looked genuinely shocked. "Bradley, what is he talking about?" Bradley's attempt at charm vanished. "Your father is clearly confused. Maybe he's having some cognitive issues. This is exactly why we need to take a more active role in managing his affairs." "I've never been clearer in my life," I said, my voice firm. "And I have documentation of everything I'm claiming. Would you like to see it?" I pulled out the folder Carlos had prepared and placed it on the table. Megan reached for it hesitantly, but Bradley snatched it first, flipping through the contents with increasing agitation. "This is invasion of privacy," he snapped. "You had us investigated. What kind of father does that? The kind who overheard his son-in-law mocking him at his daughter's wedding. The kind who was then asked to sell his home so his daughter and her husband could have a nicer one. The kind who discovered attempts to access his finances without his consent." I turned to Megan, whose face had gone pale. "I don't know how much you knew about this, Megan. I want to believe you weren't part of the attempts to take control of my money, but either way it stops now." "Dad, she began, but Bradley cut her off. "This is absurd. We were trying to help you. You're not getting any younger and that house is too much for you to maintain. We were thinking of your best interests." "No, Bradley, you were thinking of my bank account." He stood up abruptly. "I don't have to listen to this. Megan, we're leaving." Megan hesitated, looking between us. "Dad, there must be some misunderstanding. We just wanted—" "Megan, now." Bradley's voice was harsh. She rose slowly, still looking confused and hurt. "Dad, please, let's talk about this when everyone's calmer." "I am calm," I said, "and my decision is made. The trust is established. My will is updated. If you and Bradley were counting on inheriting anything substantial anytime soon, you should adjust your expectations and your spending habits." "You vindictive old man," Bradley spat. "You think you're so clever." "Bradley," Megan gasped. "No, let him speak," I said, rising to face him. "Let's have the truth for once." Bradley's mask of respectability fell away completely. "You think you're protecting yourself. We'll contest the trust. We'll claim you were unduly influenced. We'll get medical experts to testify about early dementia. By the time we're done, you'll be lucky if we let you keep your Social Security checks." Megan stared at her husband in horror. "Bradley, stop it. What are you saying?" I smiled grimly. "That's the thing about trusts, Bradley. They're very difficult to break, especially when the grantor has been thoroughly examined by two independent physicians who have certified his mental competence. Which I have been. It's all documented." Bradley grabbed his jacket. "This isn't over." "Actually, it is," I said. "You should also know that I've provided copies of all this documentation, including a recording of this conversation, to my attorney, with instructions to forward it to Commonwealth Investment Group's Ethics Committee and the SEC if you attempt to pursue any action against me or my assets." Bradley froze. "You're bluffing. You didn't record anything." I pointed to the small device sitting innocently next to the fruit bowl. "Massachusetts is a two-party consent state for recordings, which is why I specifically asked if it was okay to record our conversation when you arrived. You both said yes, though I understand you might have been distracted by evaluating how much my house is worth." Megan looked devastated. "Dad, I had no idea about any of this, about the bank accounts or the credit check. You have to believe me." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to. But the past few years had shown me a different Megan than the daughter I thought I'd raised. "If that's true, then you need to take a hard look at your marriage and your priorities, Megan. Because somewhere along the way, you decided I wasn't worth your respect anymore." They left shortly after, Bradley storming out to the car while Megan lingered in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand how we got here," she whispered. "It started long before the wedding," I told her. "But that comment, that I was just there to eat for free, that was when I knew I needed to protect myself." "I would never have allowed him to say that if I'd heard it," she insisted. "Wouldn't you? You've stood by while he's made countless dismissive comments about my work, my home, my life. You joined in sometimes, Megan. You laughed when he called me old school. You rolled your eyes when I suggested saving instead of spending." She had no response to that. "I love you," I said finally. "That will never change. But love doesn't mean allowing myself to be taken advantage of. When you're ready to have a relationship based on mutual respect, my door is open." She nodded, wiping her tears before walking to the car where Bradley waited, engine running. In the weeks that followed, I heard through mutual friends that Bradley was telling people I had lost my mind, that I was paranoid and turning against my own family. Megan called several times, alternating between tearful apologies and frustrated demands that I reconsider the trust arrangement. "It's not about the money," she insisted during one call. "It's about you not trusting me. Trust goes both ways," I reminded her, "and it has to be earned." 3 months after our confrontation, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Richard Thompson, Bradley's father. "Mitchell," he said without preamble, "we need to talk about this situation with our kids." We met at a quiet bar in downtown Boston. Richard looked older than he had at the wedding, the confidence replaced by concern. "Bradley's in trouble," he admitted after ordering a scotch. "Gambling debts, bad investments. He's been making some questionable decisions at work. The firm is investigating." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't wish destruction on them. "The thing is," Richard continued, swirling his drink, "Megan came to us yesterday. She's found some disturbing things. Credit card statements, communications with loan sharks. And apparently he's been unkind to her when she questions his spending." My heart clenched. "Is she safe?" "She's staying with us for now, but she's confused, hurt. She mentioned your conversation about the trust and everything. Said it all makes sense now." I took a deep breath. "What do you want from me, Richard?" He looked me directly in the eyes, his Wall Street bravado completely gone. "Help for my son if possible, but more importantly, support for your daughter. She's talking about divorce and I can't say I blame her. She's going to need her father." 2 days later, Megan came to the house. She looked thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, but there was a clarity in her gaze that reminded me of Catherine. We sat on the porch swing where I used to rock her to sleep as a child. For a long time we just swayed silently, watching the autumn leaves drift down from the maple tree I'd planted when we first moved in. "I left him," she said finally. "Filed for divorce yesterday." I took her hand. "Are you okay?" "No," she answered honestly. "But I will be. Dad, I'm so sorry. I got caught up in a lifestyle, in being accepted by his family, in the idea of being something more than Mitchell and Sons construction. There's nothing wrong with wanting more, Megan. But there's a difference between building something better and tearing down what came before." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I forgot who I was, who we were, when you said Bradley made that comment about you just being there to eat for free. I was horrified, but part of me wasn't surprised. And that's when I knew how far I'd strayed from everything you taught me." We talked for hours as the sun set, really talked for the first time in years. About her marriage, about my investigation, about our relationship and where it had gone wrong. There were difficult moments, painful truths exposed on both sides, but there was also healing. "I understand why you set up the trust," she said as evening fell. "I probably would have done the same thing. It wasn't just about protecting my assets from Bradley," I explained. "It was about making sure I could take care of myself without being a burden to you. And yes, it was also about making sure what I've built goes to someone who values it." "Do you think we can ever get back to where we were?" she asked, sounding young and vulnerable. "No," I said honestly. "We can't go backward, but we can build something new, something better, if we're both willing to put in the work. She leaned her head on my shoulder, just as she used to do when she was little. I'd like that. A year has passed since that conversation. Megan's divorce was finalized 6 months ago. Bradley ended up leaving Commonwealth under investigation and moved to Chicago, where his parents had connections that kept him out of more serious trouble. Megan bought a small condo in Quincy, not far from my house. She left finance and now works for a nonprofit that provides financial literacy education to underserved communities. The pay is less, but she seems happier than I've seen her in years. As for me, I retired from Mitchell and Sons last month. Mike's actual sons are running the company now, though I still consult occasionally when they need an old-timer's perspective. I've kept my house, though I did convert the basement into an apartment that I rent to a young couple starting out, charging them well below market rate because I remember what it was like to be young and struggling. The trust remains in place, though I've modified it to include provisions for Megan based on our reconciliation. More importantly, I've established a scholarship fund for students from our neighborhood who want to pursue trades or construction management degrees. The Robert and Catherine Mitchell Foundation will ensure that our values live on, supporting young people who understand the dignity of honest work. Megan comes over for dinner every Sunday. Sometimes we talk about Catherine, sharing memories that had been too painful for too long. Sometimes we discuss the future. Often, we just enjoy each other's company, the way family should. Last week, as we cleared the dishes together, Megan paused, her hands deep in soapy water. "You know what I realized recently," she said. "All those years you were working so hard, sacrificing for me, you never once made me feel like a burden. You never made me feel like I was just there to eat for free." I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her, and saw both the child I'd raised and the woman she'd become. "That's because you weren't. You were the reason for everything." She dried her hands and hugged me tightly. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know the same is true for me." In the end, I learned that family isn't just about blood or obligation. It's about respect, gratitude, and recognizing the value of what others have built for you. It's about understanding that true love sometimes means setting boundaries, and that reconciliation is possible when both parties are willing to acknowledge hard truths. I don't know what the future holds, but standing in my kitchen with my daughter once again by my side, I know that whatever comes next, we'll face it together, not as a burden to each other, but as the family we were always meant to be. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.